back to I'm Refocused Radio. We are here again with another show learning for y'all today. Today's guest, man, he has an awesome resume. We have the one and only John Dedakis. He has spent 45 years in journalism, including 25 at CNN. You might remember him from Roof. Man, the Situation Room. Talking about excitement. I remember back in the day when I was watching that. So I'm excited to learn about that part of the story, but it's so much more to the story. He's covered the White House, he's interviewed presidents, and has even got tear gas in the field. So this guy knows a little bit more than the average. First and foremost, I want to say to you, John, I could probably spend 2 more hours on your resume, but I just want to hurry up, get inside and say thank you for your time, man.
Thank you, Shemaiah. It's good to be here.
Yes, sir. You also have some deep stories as well. You face personal loss, suicide of your sister, and overdose of your son. Take us along the ride with you and your professional career in journalism, because it's a very interesting career.
Thank you. It was a long career, and that's probably because I'm old. So there's a lot more longevity there. But it goes all the way back to the late 60s when at the time my dad was a lawyer and I was going to go into practice with him, and then I was going to go into politics. And the plan was to run for president. That was really seriously part of it. But for the good of the country, I went in a different direction, primarily because I was a student at the University of Wisconsin in Madison in the late 60s when the Vietnam War was tearing the country apart. And they had a draft, and if your number was below 150, you were going to be going to Vietnam. My number was 14. So long story short, I enlisted to avoid the draft so I'd have more control over what I'd do. Got orders to Vietnam, but they were changed at the last minute. And I spent 2.5 years at the headquarters of the American Forces Radio and Television Network in Frankfurt, Germany, doing interviews for a special events radio unit. And the first interview I did was with Alfred Hitchcock. Maybe you've heard of him. And that was a life-changing moment because my boss had a mentor's heart. He could have done the interview in his sleep, and instead he trusted this kid not to screw it up. And what I found was what I was good at and what I loved. And when you put those two things together, you've really got some purpose and propulsion in your life. So that's really what got me started in journalism. Went back to school, got my degree, and was in journalism for 45 years.
You look at the pressure that comes with your career. All careers have pressure, but your case is a lot of weight on your shoulders as far as being accurate and doing the homework and reading. I can only imagine how much you have read day in, day out. Kind of walk the crowd through what it kind of looked like on a typical day when you had to prepare for what you did daily.
Well, let's see. I wore several hats over the course of 45 years. I was a reporter at a NBC affiliate television station in Madison, Wisconsin. So that was going out and covering the news with a camera crew. Then let's see. I covered the White House, and that was an entirely different experience. I felt, to be honest, over my head because a lot of the people I was with at competing networks and news organizations were much more experienced than I was. In many cases, they had advanced degrees in public policy. So I kind of kept my head down and my ears open and eyes open and did my best to try to get it right. Let's see. I went to CNN in 1988 as a writer, so I was more behind the scenes. And that was a little overwhelming because I had a degree in journalism, but at CNN, it was a big organization. And at first, they barely trusted me to write a script. And then all of a sudden, they made me an editor within the first year I got there. So that meant I was supervising the writing, even though I wasn't that experienced as a journalist, as a news writer. But you grow up fast under those circumstances. And, I think any job has pressure. I don't think it's any different. Journalism is probably a different kind of pressure, but I think everybody can point to any kind of a job that's got pressure. It's just that, you do your best to do your best.
When you look at social media, I mean, it is an animal of its own. It has a life of its own. A lot of different voices. It's a buffet line. You just pick the channel you want to follow, and boom, you have everything you can imagine you would want. But when you mix that with, dare I say, AI technology,
man, yeah,
what do you see that is changing everything, how people consume journalism?
Well, journalism has definitely evolved over the years, primarily because of technological advances. And the technological advances have sped up the process. It's easier to get the news. It's faster to disseminate the news. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it kind of brings us closer together. But it's also fractured us because now anybody with a phone is a journalist, is a publisher. Anytime you push, you push the send button or the post button, you're publishing. But there's no editor on your shoulders going, where'd you get that? How do you know that's true? And so consequently, the internet, as far as news is concerned, is the Wild West. I mean, anything goes and anything's out there. And it means that it's harder and requires more discernment to find the reputable news organizations, as opposed to just getting opinions that reinforce what you believe. Because, I think in order to have an opinion, you have to have your opinion informed so that you can decide what direction you want to tilt. And then now you mentioned AI, and I think that's still a work in progress, and we don't have, I think there's a lot we don't know about it. I think the biggest danger with AI is the deep fakes, the ability to come up with video and audio that really makes it look authentic, and it's not. And it can give a false impression before there's even a chance to really correct the record. So, and yet on the other hand, AI is great as a research tool, an organizational tool. It can write summaries and organize things. But, whether it's the internet or AI, they are morally neutral in and of themselves. It's what we do with them that makes it either a problem or something that can be really helpful.
Once again, listening to Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, John Dedakis. My next question is, I mentioned earlier about some of the challenges that you face, and we all have them, but these were personal. When it comes to family and understanding the impact that rough chapters can play in your life, what have you learned to appreciate going through those challenges?
Well, and you mentioned them. My sister's suicide in 1980 when I was on the scene that day, and my son's fatal heroin overdose in 2011. And it obviously it's terrible, and I'm not immune. I mean, I'm not the only person who's experienced something like this. Everyone has experienced some kind of pain or loss, whether it's not just the loss of a loved one. It can be the loss of a pet, a job, a friendship, your innocence, your health. Any number of things can produce a profound sense of loss and pain. And I guess the one thing I've learned looking back on it is I've learned to move toward the pain. Our society tries to anesthetize it, to numb ourselves to the pain. But as a writer and as a journalist, I've learned to face it. And I think doing so is therapeutic and cathartic, because once you are able to tap into it, you're able to try to make some meaning out of it. That's sort of the sixth stage of grief, is finding meaning. And so that's what I've attempted to do sort of subconsciously in my writing. I've written 6 mystery suspense thriller novels, and, grief and loss are themes in all of the stories that I've written.
And speaking of the political thrillers, you have one where Lark Chadwick, a young woman, tell us what is the whole plan behind that project.
Well, I write as a woman, 20-something young woman, and you'll notice I'm neither. I started writing as a woman back in probably 30 years ago when someone suggested that I should write in a way that stretches who I am. Never been a woman, at least not in this life. So I gave it a try and discovered that emotions are not gender specific. We all have the exact same emotions. It's just that the women in my life are more willing to share their emotions. They're more articulate about them. And so I found creating a female character made the story more interesting. And you draw from personal experience, and Lark is trying to figure out what to do with her life. She ends up going into journalism when she solves the mystery surrounding the car accident that orphaned her when she was an infant. And so through all 6 books, she's working with her friend and mentor, Lionel Stone, who's a former New York Times editor, Pulitzer Prize winner, and he is basically teaching her the ground rules of journalism, and she kind of helps make him a little less crusty, I guess you could say. So they have a good relationship. And so as the stories unspool, Lark gets more adept at journalism to the point where she becomes a White House correspondent, which is what I did when Reagan was president. And in Enemies Domestic, the most recent one, she's White House press secretary. She's pregnant. The dad is dead. She's ambivalent about becoming a single mom. Abortion is a crime. And the first question she's asked on her first day on the job in the daily briefing comes from a Tucker Carlson type who asks, are you or are you not planning to abort your unborn child? And that puts Lark right in the crosshairs of a highly toxic and polarized political fishbowl. And, oh, by the way, a dictator becomes president. It could never happen, but that's where we are. And Enemies Domestic, the title, refers to the oath of office that government officials have to take when they pledge to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
When you look at the process of building these stories and developing characters, how much is there a special formula of having the personality of the character versus having plot twists and turns in the story? How do you navigate that process?
Oh man, that's an excellent question. And there's no one right way. I mean, what works for me might not work for someone else. What works for me is I like to have a plan. I like to know where I'm going with the story, but I find over the years that I'm not as effective a planner as I had intended because I get started and I'm not sure how to connect the dots. I know where I want to go, but I'm missing a few steps in there. So I'm a planner, but I'm also a seat of the pantser. There are times when I just have to look at the blank screen and get my characters talking, and that moves things forward. And one of the things I've discovered about writing is that it's like dipping a straw into your subconscious. And when you ask yourself questions like, what if this were the case? That stirs up. It's like taking a sip out of your subconscious because you've stirred up things. And so the stuff that appears comes through your fingers and onto the page. It's spooky. And so that's part of the process.
Those who are listening and watching us right now, they're probably like, when you look at someone like yourself, you had an amazing career and you're still doing great things to this day. What do you believe anchors you or had anchored you throughout time as you progress in your career? I mean, covering the White House, working with Wolf Blitz, that is not something that easily comes. That's something that you meet the moment and you rise to the occasion. What have you learned about yourself as you grew in your career?
I like that question. It's a very important question. I was very fortunate. I had parents who loved each other. They were together for 53 years. I knew they loved me. And I think that, again, I look back on my life and I realize I was born on second base at a time when a lot of people didn't have the right to even suit up, much less play the game. So part of it, as I came from privilege, my parents were middle class, but still, there were solid values. They were, I was raised in the Episcopal Church, which I think is another blessing because, the liturgy is, what you say in church is very much scripture oriented, but the church is not top down, bureaucratic, guilt ridden. It's fine to have questions and doubts about your faith. And so I grew up allowed to ask questions and allowed to try to figure it out for myself, what was right, what was wrong, how to live. Had a conversion experience when I was about 19 or 20. So I was an evangelical Christian for a long time, and that brought a lot of stability to my life. I have to say, after my son died, I reevaluated everything again, because it's okay to ask questions. And I'm a little less doctrinaire now, you could say. And so I would still consider myself to be a Christian, but probably, and an Episcopalian to a certain extent, but I kind of like the Eastern thought as well. So I would say if you really want to pin me down, I'm a Buddha-palian.
When you, I mentioned Wolf, when you worked with Wolf Blitzer and the Situation Room, I said earlier, I remember watching that back in the day, and the signature was when you heard the intro.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh, what's breaking news?
Happening now.
Yeah.
And that was it's still on the air, and that's the philosophy of the show. They handle, I left in 2013, so I've been gone for a while, but the basic philosophy is they cover geopolitics, wars, presidential elections, the big stuff. And the whole idea is to make it as up to date and current as possible. That means that, there may be a plan for how the show is going to unfold, but the understanding is, it's going to blow up and change during the show. And Wolf is amazingly nimble in the way he can pivot going from one thing to the next. And even if he's going in a direction that he's not well versed in, although he's a very smart guy, he just follows his curiosity as a journalist to find out who, where, what, when, why, how, the basic journalism questions to get the story. He's a journalist's journalist, and it's a dying breed, unfortunately.
When you think about the qualities that makes a good journalist based on what you've been able to experience in your professional career,
I think two things. One thing is curiosity. You really have to wonder why. You want to be careful about becoming doctrinaire. I use that term again because, it's okay to have opinions, but you need to be open to the possibility that the facts might alter those opinions. The other thing is to be fair. Again, you can have opinions, but your job is to inform, not persuade. And that means that it's certainly important to get one side of the story, but it's especially important to get the side that you don't necessarily agree with, and to be as fair as possible so that they have their opportunity to present their best argument. And I think that's still fundamental to reputable journalism. And I'll be honest with you, I think that still exists. It primarily is the Associated Press, Reuters. It's print journalism, I think, that is still doing it well. So I think, that it's still possible to come across reputable, fact-based journalism even in this day and age.
This is not Refocused Radio, watching this online, talking to our guest today, John Dedakis. My next follow-up question today is, there is a lot of young aspiring journalists out there. When you look at the core that keeps the work fair and accurate, what will be your words of wisdom to the next generation of journalists?
The flippant answer is run away, but don't, because we need you now more than ever. We need you to be independent-minded. it's entirely possible that your parents were, pushing you in a certain direction, and that's fine. I mean, parents love their kids, but you are your own person, and if you're drawn to journalism, then don't be afraid to go against the grain. Don't be afraid to stand up to power, including your parents. You don't have to, you can say what you mean without being mean when you say it. And so following your curiosity, being fair, and getting good at writing fast and succinctly, I think, is another skill set that you really need to cultivate. So I think if you do that and have that kind of drive and be, careful, accurate, fair, curious, you're going to be fine.
When you put on your editor's hat and coach hat, what do you believe is the number one mistake you see in writers today when it comes to writing?
Well, I mean, you're kind of speaking to my writing coach and manuscript editing hat now, and there are a lot of problems I see. Probably one of the biggest ones is that someone, and this I think is it's only natural when a person has never written a novel before. They've got this great idea, and they sit down and they write white hot for about 50 pages, and then they stop because they realize they haven't thought it through, and they give up and they quit because it's overwhelming. They realize there's more going on there. The other thing that happens is that when they do tell a story, they're telling the story as opposed to showing the story. The best way to show a story is to have characters talking to each other. It's really not much different than watching a TV show or a movie. People are talking, and that is the way the story comes alive. There's a tendency to throw backstory in. Some people get the story started, the people are talking and you've written an intriguing character, but then all of a sudden you feel this burning desire to go back 25 years and put the story into context. And it's too soon for that. You can sprinkle that information throughout the story as opposed to, taking the reader out of the moment in order to give them context that they don't necessarily need right away. So those are a couple of things.
And they probably did ask for it.
Yeah.
When you look at the possibilities with technology, we kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but nowadays you now have your laptop, you have ChatGPT, which I have the paid version, and there's a lot of ways you can navigate this world now that at once upon a time it was even thought of. What excites you about the possibilities of journalism in the future versus what it used to be like in the past?
I'm not sure I'm excited about journalism in the future. I think that we are in a dark place. We have a president, and I'm not being partisan when I say this. We have a president who lies reflexively all the time, every time he opens his mouth. And that has given permission to a lot of other people, mostly his cabinet and supporters, to be the same way. And so I think that journalism has its work cut out for it to be able to fact check, to be able to put things in perspective, to be willing to ask the questions that need to be asked, and not just to, adopt the company line because Trump says so. So I think journalism has a long way to go before it gets turned around, because there's so many people out there who are influencers with hundreds of thousands of followers and absolutely no editorial oversight. So journalism's in the balance, especially because it's also under attack. You've got the administration suing, for instance, the Wall Street Journal for $10 billion because they reported that Trump signed a lewd birthday card to Jeffrey Epstein, and Trump denied it, and now it's out there. He's still denying it. He's still saying that's not his signature, blah, blah, blah. But, the jury's still out. But When you've got a president shaking down news organizations for $20 billion and then they settle for 16 million, that's a dangerous precedent, and it puts journalism in jeopardy.
Just getting listen time, Refocused Radio, and watching us online, talking to our guest today, John Dedakis. Man, I can't believe it went so fast.
I know.
Before we close out, if you had a message for young people, I always believe and give my guests this opportunity, what will you want to say to them?
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid what people think. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Be cautious, count the cost, but do your best to move forward in spite of the fear, because fear is a normal reaction and a normal emotion. But the opposite of courage is cowardice. That means knowing what you should do and freezing. Courage is fear in action. It's going forward anyway, in spite of how you feel. And the byproduct is confidence. So my suggestion is do stuff that frightens you a little bit.
Well, like always, I want to say to you, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Shemaiah. It was great. It went fast.